Hello, everybody! Back for another wicked live stream. So today we've got Tim Goldich and Jana from Women Against Feminism, and we're going to be talking about toxic masculinity. So this is a topic that I think is very, very important because a lot of feminists are always talking about the concept of toxic masculinity. What does it mean? And, I think that it's just a way to shame and belittle traditionally masculine qualities in men, personally. But yeah, let's hear what the panel has to say about this today. Shoot.
Oh my. Well, um, first I'll give a little shout out to NCFM, that's the National Coalition for Men. I'm vice president of that, and I just want to express my admiration for that organization. It's blessed with some particularly good leadership. And all right, so toxic masculinity. Oh my God. Well, I think it's perfectly fair to talk about masculine shadow and feminine shadow. That's a Jungian term, which means that it's steeped in depth of intellectual depth, because it's a product of a genius of Carl Jung. And these are important to look at. To be balanced, we also have to look at the masculine gold and the feminine gold. But sure, I have no problem with looking at male shadow. Toxic masculinity, it's over the top. I mean, it just strikes me as mean-spirited. It strikes me as too extreme, too hopeless, sort of too hostile. So I would judge that the term toxic masculinity is a product of misandry, which of course is the mirror opposite of misogyny.
Okay, nicely said. Jana, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, so I was just saying that I recently saw a German movie called Wunderschöner, and it's a very recent movie, and it dealt a lot with the theme of toxic masculinity. But the thing is, they presented it as though, well, in one of the okay. It was a movie about 5 different women and their lives, and they were all feminists. It's a feminist movie, very, very pro-feminist. So it's all about feminism. And within the movie, there were 2 different classes where they had to teach feminism. So there was one, they separated the boys and the girls, and they had a male teacher who was a male feminist who had to teach feminism to the boys, and they had a female teacher who had to teach feminism to the girls. And the male teacher, his job basically was to teach the boys not to be toxic, to teach the boys what toxic masculinity was, and to not be toxic anymore. So of course the boys were learning all about toxic masculinity and stuff like that. But the entire movie, the entire film, they basically presented toxic masculinity and masculinity in general as basically like a defect that men are born with, and it had to do with their sexuality. So in a sense, they sort of thought that men are toxic because they are too sexual, in a sense, because they push their sexuality on women, because they're aggressive, because the teacher defined it more along the lines of aggression to do with bullying and stuff like that. But all the women defined it, or what hurt them as the toxic masculinity, was that the men were too obsessed with them sexually, just wanted to kiss them, just like wanted to rape them, to use this word, just wanted to, be on them or whatever, right? So it was sort of presented as this, like, men are just defective because they are naturally either too aggressive or too sexual. And I thought, yeah, okay, fine. This is how they made the movie. It was very interesting. I didn't agree with a lot of it, but whatever, right? My thing is that I think if you're going to teach, even if something like toxic masculinity exists, although I don't know if the word is the correct thing for what we're talking about. Words are just words, right? I feel like if they could have taught that, if they were going to teach it to kids, not in the way of, oh my God, this is just men and this is what men naturally are like, and we need to, because I don't think that's true. It's nothing to do with naturally men or anything like that. I think this whole thing is just some sort of like, it's tradition and stuff like that that's left over from a time where men were the protectors and providers of society in a very real, strong way, in a sense. And in order to complete that role, they had to be less emotional than women. They had to be whatever. And these are traits that are left over. I mean, because they were trying to address traits like bullying and, of course, they claim traits like, being mean to women in this way. I don't know if that's a true thing. I don't walk around feeling afraid of men in this way. But if something, I don't know. My point is male aggression. If it exists and is a problem, I think it's something left over from history. Yet they often in the feminist world, or at least if you should look at this movie because it really gives insight into what probably extreme feminism is or what they think about. They paint it as this is an innate quality of men. Men are innately aggressive, and this is absolutely not true. I just don't think it's true. I don't think men are innately aggressive. I don't think men are innately, any of what they say. Men are innately more sexual than women. Probably that's true, but that doesn't mean aggression. That doesn't mean bullying. I don't know. I just don't think men are innately what they think, or what is it, And I feel like even if they are innately, the way to teach it is still not like this.
Right.
The way to teach men about themselves, I would have just linked it to history and say, okay, we no longer need to be, you were the protectors and providers of society. You've done a good job and now society is safe. So, men, show your feelings,
Yeah. So I would say that, there's a lot of hostility between women and men, male and female. And it comes out on both ends. And both sexes can cast all these judgments about the other. And they do. And I always have. And so I've been getting a lot of mileage recently out of a quote from Benjamin Franklin. It's been expressed in a number of ways, but it's like a half-truth is as good as a lie, or a half-truth is a whole lie. And see, I just started a little essay. It's going to be a brief one. And it's going to be called Misogyny is a Lie. Okay. Why? Why am I saying that? Not because there's no hostility toward women, not because there's no anti-female bias in the world, but rather because misogyny is presented as if it stood alone. Most people have never even heard of the mirror opposite word, which is misandry. So if presented as something that stands alone, it's a half-truth, which makes it a lie, a whole lie, as Benjamin Franklin would say. And this is what's going on with this is toxic masculinity. You want to look at you want to call it toxic. You want to be that judgmental and hold men under a high-powered judgment microscope and call their traits toxic. Well, I don't think that's a good way to go about it. But if you're going to do that, then you have to look at toxic femininity too. You see, at least you have to be balanced with it, right? As far as male and female traits, well, I think there are differences between male and female that are biological, but like all things, you can look at them in a positive way or a negative way. You can empathy interpret, or you can antipathy interpret. Male aggression is a good thing when it's channeled in a good way, and male extreme heterosexual desire, well, women have been profiting off that for eons. So I mean, all these things have a dual nature. You can't just present as this is good and this is bad. That's called dualism. Dualism. The problem with dualism is it's either or. A thing is either good or it's bad, and that's not how the world works. Duality is everything is both good and bad, depending on how you look at it and what you want, and so on. So there's a duality to all these things, and this feminism piece that you're looking at is only looking at one side. It's not allowing that there's a shadow side and a light side to all these things.
And they're not giving credit for when this was useful or how this made it useful. They're just saying it's natural to men and it's bad. But it could have been useful, and it has been useful. And also, I'm not sure it's completely natural to men, because I think men are also naturally emotional and stuff too.
Sure. But men do have 10 to 15 times the testosterone coursing through their veins, or at least up until recently. The testosterone levels are decreasing, but still, men have a lot more of it, and testosterone is responsible for libido in both sexes. You know, and these things are always complicated. Always all these other factors you can look at, but still, you know, take it under consideration. Men do have a whole lot more testosterone coursing through their veins than women do. Now, is it you know, see, I happen to think you can look at all the negatives about it, but I happen to think that our human social evolution is all about the dynamic between men and women. That what feminists see as patriarchy from a politicized male perspective, it's nothing more than men everywhere set in fierce competition in their efforts to perform, achieve, and succeed their way into having what women are empowered to demand of them. And part of that power is sexual power. And you see, there's like, recently, you know, I was saying, you know how feminists like to chant, women hold up half the sky, right? And somebody said, well, that's a bunch of BS. Just look outside. Everything was built by men. And I say, yeah, but men wouldn't have built a damn thing. If it weren't for women, we wouldn't have done it. It was this synergy between male and female.
Right.
Yeah,
and somebody asked,
someone in the comments just said, if toxic masculinity exists, so does toxic femininity.
Yeah.
I think that ties in very well with what's been said. And I also think that this idea of the shadow self is true, because the problem is that toxic masculinity, as has been said, it only looks at one half. And if we're going to say there's toxic masculinity, there must also be toxic femininity. Now, Jana, I just want to touch on what you said about aggression and sex, because it's true that men have more testosterone, which is why they have higher sex drives. However, men also, I agree that men are not inherently more aggressive, because if we look at the stats, women commit just as much domestic violence. Lesbians have the highest rates of domestic violence. And there's also something to be said as well for evolution. You know, men have evolved to have certain traits that are attractive to women. And I think feminists are calling these traits toxic masculinity. And a lot of these traits are perfectly admirable traits like dominance, assertiveness, leadership. And these traits are being called toxic. So what's up with that?
So maybe toxic is a word for what they're saying is that it's like abuse of, if we are to get all, you know, metaphoric in a sense in this, men have their power, which is whatever their power is. And in this case, it's an abuse of their aggression or strength. Then if it is, we look at it like this, then I would say toxic femininity would be an abuse of our sexual power as one form of toxic femininity. Because also, like I said in this film, how they explored it, they showed like the women who are anti-feminist would have been they put them as the young woman, painted them as dumb or whatever. And their argument was that women have sexual power. Women are sexy and women can make men do whatever they want because women have sexual power. So if male toxic masculinity is abuse of strength, then is toxic femininity an abuse of sexual power? I mean, of course, toxic femininity probably comes in many ways, just as toxic masculinity comes in many ways. But it's an interesting question, right?
Yeah, well, both sexes abuse power. Both sexes work the powers they have in compensation for the powers they lack. And both sexes, abuse the powers they have. One of the ways woman abuses her power, or a greater power to elicit empathy, is to raise only female concerns to the level of major societal concerns. Yeah, I mean, you can look at male shadow and female shadow, and I think we must look at, and we must also look at male gold and female gold also, to be balanced and fair, not just be negative, you know. But yeah, I mean, there are, you know, it's accountability, okay? It's accountability. It's holding men accountable, and it's holding women accountable.
I actually asked a feminist once, if you believe in toxic masculinity, do you also believe in toxic femininity? And she was like, oh, no, it's not the same. Actually, there was this guy I once talked to about toxic masculinity, and his point actually was that toxic masculinity is the feminization of men. So his point was that toxic masculinity isn't men being masculine, it's men becoming more feminine and thus weaker and embodying traits that make them less kind of traditionally masculine, you know, protective and dominant and good. So I think that's a very interesting idea, toxic masculinity as the feminization of men. Someone said, is toxic in this context meaning bad things men and women do, or does it only mean abuse? I mean, yeah, toxic, probably bad female or male behavior, but not necessarily what feminists
traits
say.
Associated. I would say it means traits
yeah.
associated to masculinity that harm society, harm both men and women. So
Like
traits associated, like being overly aggressive. I know for women they associate femininity with a manipulation. What else? You know, so things like that would be toxic femininity. But you know, it's why I said abuse is just, I mean, it's interesting if we are to pick at these strengths that women and men have and then say, okay, well, even if you have that strength, you're not allowed to abuse it, because then that becomes toxic. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't know if that's what it can be. Yeah.
But you see, it's not always an abuse. Women do have more power. Well, let me put it this way. The powers women more often possess better lend themselves to the strategies of manipulation. And of course, manipulation can be defined as an indirect, non-valorous, sideways, sort of pulling strings. It can be defined in a very negative way. And when Jesus stepped out in front of the crowd and said, "Let ye who is without sin cast the first stone," he wasn't working a dominant strategy there. That's a manipulative strategy. When Gandhi refused to eat until all the violence was come down, he wasn't seizing dominance. He was manipulating the situation.
Is that manipulation or influence?
Well, wait, hold on though. It's just, so what the point is that there's a light side to these things. There's a shadow side to manipulation, and there's a gold side to manipulation. When a wife tells her husband, "Oh, you're so sexy since you've been going to the gym and eating right," you know, it's manipulative, but in a positive way. And same with domination. You can look at it as domination as imposing one's will through a greater show of force, which is ethically indefensible.
Exactly.
Or you can look at domination as men leading by example, men who have such discipline, such wisdom, such competence that people just want to follow.
Right. So in my opinion, that point brings me back to like also other films that I've watched and so on. But what I want to say is that, so we can say aggression, if we take aggression can be used positively to protect society.
Sure.
And historically, it has been used in that way to protect society. And this is why you still have maybe traditionally we teach men to be more aggressive, I guess, you know, or promote aggression, because historically it has been used to protect society. And this is a positive
and build
use
society. Yeah.
It's a positive use of aggression, a positive use of, and that's why it got tied up in our notions of masculinity. So if that same aggression is used against society or against, then it becomes toxic. That can be, and it's the same with I guess you could say for the female side, I guess you could say sexuality. I don't really know how female sexuality has been used positively, but yeah, maybe
it's been used positively to inspire.
Okay,
see both sexes look at the other and they feel both superior and inferior to their opposite sex. And it's out of this feeling of inferiority that both sexes seek to compensate. And in so doing, there's been a mechanism whereby both men and women are struggling to be the best they can be in relative to be worthy of their opposite sex.
Yeah.
Back when these things were so romanticized, a man would look at a woman and see this earth angel, see this beauty, this grace, this goodness, all this stuff, and he would feel inferior to her, and he would feel compelled then to go out and make something of himself in order to be worthy of her. And so there's been that aspect to the gender where each sex inspires the best out of each other.
Right. So I love Korean films, and one of the things that I really love about Korean romantic films is how they always show the male. He's like competent, maybe he's rich, whatever. He has the power, or however he derives power, whether it's through wealth or whatever, right? But he will never use that power, and they always show it that he will never ever use his power unless it is to defend her, unless it is to protect her, unless it is to, he will let himself totally get beaten up. He will let himself be talked down to if it's something to do with him, or if it's something that, but when it comes to defending that woman or protecting that woman, then he will use his power. And this is the beauty of, and I always thought, this is the way in which they show masculinity. It's so beautiful. You know what I mean? It's not is not at all toxic. And I guess maybe feminists are trying to, but they don't do it very well because they don't differentiate. They just say aggression. Aggression is totally toxic. But we need to make this distinction. What is actually toxic? Just like with female sexual power. And this comes back to like within marriages and thing. It was also very well portrayed in that show, in that movie, Wonder Xiolier, because all of the women had different problems with their husbands from cheating and so on. And this is because within the marriage, women having a lower sex drive, they refuse to have sex on the man's terms, and different things happened as a result. But historically, we always had this concept, which feminists will say is terrible, but historically, traditional society had this concept of submit to your husband, fulfill his needs or whatever. And this was a way of telling women, yes, you have sexual power, do not abuse it. Use it to uplift your husband. Do not abuse sexual power. And so this is the thing about the female versus male powers. If you have power, if men have masculinity, which is a powerful and beautiful thing, they need to use it in a non-toxic way. Just as where women have their sexuality and our powers or whatever, use it in a non-toxic way. And society sometimes does need to remind, but not in the way in which feminism does it, because feminism forgets that women have any power, says that men have, power, and also that it's all bad. They don't acknowledge that it has been used historically for good. And that is actually the reason it's still embedded within our traditional.
Sure. Getting back to Carl Jung, so he defined the human shadow as that which we hide, repress, and deny. So what he taught was you've only got two choices with human shadow. You can either own it or not own it, but it's going to be there either way. So he recommended owning it. Why? So you can keep an eye on it. See, if I deny having a human shadow, then I'm operating out of naivete, and my shadow is free to sneak up from behind, get its hands on the wheel, and drive the bus, you see. But if I know I have a shadow side, and I know that shadow voice inside myself, then I can keep an eye on it and keep it under control. I can use the energy of the shadow without ever letting it drive the bus, you see. And so that's why it's so important for both sexes to own their shadow side.
No, I completely agree. I'm a big fan of Carl Jung as well. And this is also where I think the suppression of masculinity and femininity can actually make people become more toxic, in the sense that, like, if men suppress their innate masculine qualities of wanting to be in charge, and if women suppress their feminine qualities, because Jana talks a lot about sexual power, but I also think there's an emotional element of toxic female behavior, or toxic femininity. Women can be very, very emotionally manipulative, like tears, like I think it was Cersei in Game of Thrones talking about how tears are a woman's weapon, or
Well, women
women
have a whole array of weaponry. In my book, I identify 14 modes of female power. Yeah, sexual power is one of them. Emotional power is definitely one of them also. And motherhood power and presumed innocence and a kind of moral authority.
Yeah.
A whole array of the greater power to elicit empathy, the greater power to inflict shame. Well, there's all these things, these female modes of power. They're really important to know them and understand them, just so that we have a balanced understanding of male and female and how they're actually equal partners in the human system and actually exert an equal overall force of influence and are thus equally responsible for outcomes, both good and bad.
Yeah, no, it's true. And also, what I really want to kind of get to the crux of is toxic masculinity, like, are we talking about toxic male behavior, as in men behaving in toxic ways, or is there actually something inherently toxic about masculinity and something toxic about femininity? Because that's what I always get confused by.
I would say it's generally presented as the latter. I think it's generally toxic masculinity is generally understood to be some defect within masculinity itself.
I see. Yeah, that's awful.
Don't you think?
Sorry, one. Does complete freedom of choice trump societal duties and obligations? Men only sex for enforcement of law. Women are the only ones that can have children. Take these away, society will suffer. Yeah, I mean, women and men both have certain duties, and as discussed in traditional societies, men and women both had certain roles to uphold for the maintenance of society. And I think that, I think we can all agree these behaviors of men and women have evolved so that we can effectively have functioning societies, because otherwise, if we have the suppression of, the shadow side of man, the shadow side of woman, if we have women, abusing their sexual power, this will effectively lead to conflicts and adversaries between men and women, which unfortunately we're seeing today with the breakdown of marriage and relationships.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Yeah, I mean, I started off my anti-feminism journey as a very traditionalist person with traditionalist mindset. Getting into feminism and talking to people who are anti-feminist and who are feminists, they caused me to change my mind and become more open-minded, which is a good thing. To explore feminism from a more egalitarian point of view and anti-feminism as well. I think from all angles they sort of make sense. Maybe traditionalists are a bit too rigid in their thinking though. But at the end of the day, I think there's also a grain of truth in traditionalism in that there was balance, and this was a system that our ancestors, for better or for worse, whoever these people are, recommended because it worked for them and created some sort of balance within the particular setting that they were in. And so it worked. It may not be that it works today perfectly and we have to change this and that, but for some people it does work. So yeah.
So I'd like to ask the two of you, what do you guys think is the solution to getting rid of this idea of men being inherently toxic based on men being more aggressive than women? And also, how does this tie in with the concept of female privilege? So women having potentially more privilege in the sense that women, we don't ever hear about toxic femininity, even though we've discussed it here. Why do we only ever hear about toxic masculinity, and what can we do to kind of get rid of that?
Well, I would say the solution is to be more balanced. As it stands now, there's feminism on the one hand, and on the other hand, there's a kind of like nothing, especially like officially, whatever officially means. The Time magazine version of gender reality is that men have the power, women are the victims. Man bad, the over-empowered oppressor. Woman good, the innocent victim. That's kind of taught in school. Probably not that bluntly, but it's taught in school in terms of patriarchy and so on. So the solution, oh boy, putting an end to feminism's ideological dictatorship. replacing feminism with a new gender-neutral gender politics that I would call gender equalism, that would continue to address any and all women's issues. It just wouldn't address women's issues exclusively, and it would allow both sexes would enter into it as equals. As a man, I can't enter into femalism as an equal. But all genders can enter into gender equalism as equals. There's no moral polarity in it. There's no man bad, woman good, and there's no woman bad, man good in it. It's a truer equality, and it allows us to enlighten on both sides, and allows for at least some hope that woman and man might eventually sort of call it even and start all over, looking at gender issues as matters of shared responsibility and as mirror opposites of each other, and how woman and man co-created this whole thing in co-equal co-partnership, and there's no one to blame. There's no reason for hate or hostility. We're just going to look at this thing, and both sexes are equally responsible for it. And so we're not going to froth at the mouth about it. We're going to, when we get through talking about sexual harassment, we'll take a look at economic harassment. We as gender equalists, we know that there's always a mirror opposite. So we can discuss these things in a constructive way.
So I would say my answer to that would be different. Now, I agree that feminists have a larger voice and are heard more by society, respected more. As you said, they're in schools and so on, and whereas men's voices doesn't exactly get the same exact attention, right? But when you say that we only hear about toxic masculinity and not about toxic femininity and what is the solution, I don't think that's actually true. I think we hear about toxic masculinity within the realm of feminism, but men do complain about women in their own way, and we definitely hear about the complaints of men, just not through feminism, because feminism is not the voice of men in any way, shape, or form. Right. I think when men are ready to complain, they will say things like gold diggers, whatever it is men have to complain about, they totally will complain, and they do complain, and society does hear them, maybe not as loudly as they may hear women, but men have their ways of complaining and of complaining about women as well. And
sorry, I can finish it for you.
Maybe slut shaming is one of those ways, calling derogatory names for women who sleep around, gold digging, and so on. But men definitely complain about women. Okay.
So I agree. The red pill and the kind of rise of men going their own way, I think we are seeing a lot of men complaining about women and then talking about toxic female behavior. But this to me seems more of a backlash. Historically, men were more expected to be very respectful and honorable towards women. They're expected to be chivalrous. There's also, I was thinking about this as well earlier, the concept what feminists call benevolent sexism, which is toxic masculinity when men are good to women, i.e. a man holding the door open for her or giving her his coat or paying on a date. This is known as benevolent sexism, which is a bit ridiculous. But men
talk about a no-win scenario. What's a man supposed to do, right?
Yeah, exactly. So this idea of men complaining about women is only now that I personally am seeing this. Slut shaming, in my experience, is much more women on women. So women are the ones who tend to shame other women more about, how many people they've slept with or how they're dressed. It seems that I think that rivalry is more common women versus each other, because women are much more in competition with each other. Like women compete for looks and sexuality and etc. So I think the women are much cattier towards one another than men are towards women. That's my personal thought.
Okay, so you would say this is a question of who hit first. Now, if we look at it like that,
what I mean is what you're saying is that I think the whole thing of men complaining about women has only become common now with the rise of the red pill. But I think historically, generally, it's more I don't think men generally are actually bad to women on the whole. Of course, some men can be.
No. But this is, to me, this is a question of who started first. Was it feminism? So I agree, it completely was feminism. Feminists started this war of the gender. So I completely agree with you that women hit first, feminism started it. But that doesn't mean that it's like a fight. Women hit first, then men hit, then women hit, then, and then we end up just fighting and down the road where everyone is upset with everyone and we're in a standstill and we're in a gender war. I mean, I'm not saying men shouldn't ever hit back, or they shouldn't complain, or they shouldn't. I mean, they have no choice. Okay, women hit first. It happened. I'm not defending women or saying that they're innocent in this case, but I am saying, well, they do have a voice. We have heard them, and this is a fight that goes two ways. And yeah, I mean, it's not just women. You know, men have their part to play in this fight as well. And I'm not sure what men could have done differently. I agree that they are reacting. I don't know what they could have done to stop this, but yeah, both sides need to put down the guns, really. Because who hit first? Women. But I wasn't one of those women. You weren't one of those women. There's so many women today who weren't those women. And I think many feminists today, I really believe that most feminists today were hit, in that they didn't start off as feminists. They got hurt by things that men said and did, and this is why they ended up being feminists. So right now we're in a gender war that no one in this generation actually started, and we just need to figure out how to stop, you know.
Well, a couple things. I would say that yes, feminism struck first, but men enabled it. So there's always this wheel of complicity that goes round and round between the sexes. And as far as, you know, I don't wish to put down the heroic efforts of the men's rights movement, the politicized men's movement, or say that it hasn't affected change. And geez, there are whole vistas out there in this world that have no clue about men's issues. They've never even heard the word misandry. They're completely feminist indoctrinated, and they're in higher positions of power and throughout academia and so on. So I would say that the politicized men's movement has a long way to go before it even approaches the power of feminism.
Okay.
Yeah, so someone says, so how do we bring women back to traditional feminine values without triggering the woke brigade? How do we bring men's confidence back? Thoughts on positive propaganda on marriage monogamy?
I think I would like to answer that question, if it's okay. I would say what we need to do is admit that. So to me, I like the word cultural Christianity or whatever. I don't think we need to bring women back to anything, or we don't need to go back to traditionalism, but we need to admit that traditionalism wasn't what feminists paint it as. So we need to stop demonizing traditionalism and admit that even though it's not perfect today, because things have changed, at the time when it was in place, it was actually a quite equal arrangement that was agreed on by both men and women, that was put in place to protect both men and women, and that the reason it was recommended to society for so long was because it worked, and it was not an unequal, unfair, crazy thing. You know, that I think is important, to not stigmatize traditionalism as
Yeah, it was the concept of what's known as complementarianism. I just put that on the screen for people to see, because that's actually a very Christian idea. I know none of us here are religious, but complementarianism is basically the idea that men and women are equal, but we have different roles, and those roles are meant to be complementary. So egalitarian, like, I think people now say egalitarian to mean basically not a feminist, but I believe in equal rights, or as Tim says, gender equalism. But really, I think complementarianism is the technically correct idea, because what that means is that men and women are equal in the sense that we deserve equal opportunities and equal respect, but we have different roles in a marriage, in society, in family, and we work better when we work to complement each other's roles rather than when we try to compete with each other.
Yeah. Well, I actually deeply agree with that. That's kind of one of the deeper precepts of gender equalism, is that men and women are and have always been equal, not the same, but equal. The two ends of a balance beam need not be identical to weigh the same, and the sexes need not be identical to be equal. Look at it this way. Men and women are and have always been about equal in number, evenly matched, with about equal overall weaponry and efficacy. And men and women have always been sort of equal partners, exerting an equal overall force of influence in the human system. And this whole gender system was co-created by woman and man in co-equal co-partnership, because out of the deal, each sex got what it wanted most.
Right.
So look at it like that. How much more equal could we be?
Right.
See, what much of society demands is what I'll call unisex equality. It's like exact sameness of equality. It's like 4 = 4 equality. But what we've really got here is more like equals MC squared equality, where the two entities on either side of the equal sign are very, very different things, but they're equal because they weigh the same. And we need to kind
And
of...
I think feminists are reacting to the idea that they live in today's society where they're not having babies, and they're not seeing why it is men and women were so different. Historically, though, men and women really were different because women had babies and had to deal with breastfeeding and had to deal with children on them, and so on and so on. Where we didn't have birth control, we really did lead 2 different lives, and that meant that we had to have different traditions following so different norms. So nowadays we don't have that big gap, and so women are reacting to that, and they're looking at the past with this negative idea that, oh, we must have been just oppressed. And I think this is really important to not teach this in schools. But according to such movies, we actually have people, I don't know if it's true, but going into schools and teaching the very thing that historically women were oppressed, which is, I mean, it's really But then if I say
it's imbalanced, it's so imbalanced. Yeah,
unfair,
women have been less respected,
but if I say I
but
don't
more
like
loved.
that, then I sound like a Trump supporter also, which I'm absolutely not. So, and I don't want to sound like that, because I don't really support the conservative right who wants to go into schools and teach religion either. But I also don't agree with the left who wants to go into schools and teach that women were oppressed.
Yeah. Well, so again, to me, the solution is to be more balanced. It's to understand, yes, historically, women have been less respected, but they've been more loved. Men have been more respected, but less loved. And that this has been a balanced system, which isn't the same as a good system necessarily, you see, but just that it's balanced. And to understand it that way, that neither sex has been the victim and neither sex has had the power.
No, yeah. And women have had certain issues that women today don't see.
Sure. Yeah. So did men. Men had, there was a time when if a wife committed a crime, the husband went to jail.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, I mean, the gender system has become more fair.
Yeah, it is very
fair to
complicated.
both sexes, hopefully, you see.
It is very complicated, but it is dangerous for people to go into schools and teach these things.
Oh my God, it's terrible.
As real.
Because it gets back to what I said at the beginning. A half truth is as good as a lie.
Yeah.
If you only teach one half of the reality,
if you go
you're
into
lying.
Schools and teach religion, as if you go into schools and teach women were oppressed all of society. I think this is the same. It's just a different religion. Because this is really your opinion being taught as fact.
Yeah.
And someone's religion is their opinion. I support their right to believe whatever it is they want to believe. But I hope it stays out of schools.
Yeah.
Anyway, folks, so I think we want to wrap up in a couple minutes now. This has been a very, very great discussion. We've got some good comments. Thank you to Vincent Devachis, I can't pronounce your name, but yeah, no, it's very good. We do these every week. Very, very good discussion. So let's just summarize. So I think what I've gotten from this discussion is that there's an evolutionary component to masculine and feminine behavior that's based on how we have needed to work together. There's the stuff about Jung and the shadow side. There's the idea of female sexual manipulation and toxic feminine behavior. But yeah, I think that we can all agree that if we're going to talk about toxic male behavior, we have to address toxic female behavior as well, and ultimately accept the fact that both men and women can be equally capable of being quite nasty, not just to each other, but also to people of the same sex.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, thank you for tuning in, everyone who has watched. I'm the Rational Female. Please check out the subreddit, Women's Advocates. I'm just going to show it again. On that subreddit, it's a great subreddit. Long term, I'm thinking of making it a website, but we'll hold that thought for now. But yeah, it's going to be, it's basically we talk about pro-female stuff, but we're anti-feminism. And I think there needs to be a really good space for women to kind of pro-female stuff, but without being pro-feminist, because as we've all said here today, feminism is only ever looking at one half of the issue, and there's such power of feminists, they have a lot more power in the world in certain organizations than MRAs, and it's going to take a long time for men to get their dues. So I think that, women's advocacy is about being allies to the men's movement and supporting the men's movement, but we're not MRAs, we're kind of non-feminists who are also pro-female and pro-equality. So yeah, that's a round off. Any last thoughts from the two of you, or are we ready to finish?
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Until next time. Thank you for watching, everybody, and end of the stream now.